You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining. And this week, I'm happy to welcome Nick Hayes. Welcome, Nick.
Yo, hey Dylan,
So,
great to be on the show.
yeah,
Actually,
thanks for coming on.
kind of an honor, and just really humbled to be able to speak to your audience. This has actually kind of been inspirational for me to actually get more involved with social media because it kind of comes and goes in waves, and so I've actually been trying to post a lot since we agreed to do this, so you'd actually know what I've been doing. So I hope
I
to
appreciate
continue
that.
posting more on Instagram and other places.
Awesome. So, for those who don't know who you are or what you do, what are the details? What is Valence Precision? Who are you? Let's get into it.
Yeah, so like I said, Nick Hayes, and I'm the president and founder of Valence Precision. We're in Richmond, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm just a little bit north of Berkeley and Oakland.
Awesome. Well, let's get into your backstory then. How did you come to own Valence Precision and what was your path into manufacturing?
Yeah, so a lot of us here share indirect paths, and that's certainly how mine went. I'm actually going to preface this as I'm not a very good machinist, and I haven't been doing it for very long. So I'm going to turn 40 next month, and I've only actually been machining the last 10 years. So I've quite a bit of job history that's not really related to machining, but always R&D and hands-on stuff, and just kind of a problem solving type you know environments. So I'm gonna dial way back here and actually go back to second grade because we all kind of have that moment where we realize we like using our hands, and that was it. That was it for me. So I had a second grade teacher named Mr. Harrison, and part of his curriculum was students would have their parents bring in broken mechanical things, and he would let us just run wild and take them apart. And I remember anything else from grade school except for that. That was just so cool to me to have a Phillips screwdriver and take apart my first KitchenAid. And you see gears and electric motors and wiring and switches, and it kind of clicks like, oh, this is not just magic. Like this is things that can be understood. And so,
How cool.
yeah,
It's funny, jogged a memory. So I came from a family that we took, a million things apart and fixed things. My dad was always about that. But a memory I have in third grade was my brother and I got matching RC cars for like Christmas or something. And then like within 2 months, one or I think both of them broke. And sometime in third grade, I don't know if it was spurred on by something in school or not, but I took both of them apart, found all of the broken parts, swapped dissimilar ones and had one good working RC car. And I was so proud of it. And then, like you said, it's one of those things that like stands out as a highlight in grade school.
yeah. So this newfound passion kind of got me in trouble at some points too, because I was maybe overconfident. And again, I'm still, 7 years old here, pretty young. And I'm an only child. My parents were great parents, but kind of like semi free range. And so they would, go to the grocery store and leave me home alone. And it was totally fine. But one time they came home much quicker than I was expecting them to. And they found me in the back room with their vacuum cleaner completely disassembled. And, and they were like pretty upset. They said, "You've ruined the vacuum cleaner." And I said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm pretty sure I can put this together," and was able to. And they were like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," And so they've actually always been supportive. But yeah, it definitely shocked them when they saw, this 7-year-old with a screwdriver. Like, no, I can fix anything. That's definitely not the truth. The vacuum cleaner wasn't broken for one, so just getting it back together working was a challenge probably. So, skipping ahead a bit, obviously, when I was 15, I was cars, cars, manual transmissions. My dad was kind of into cars, and so we had like no like sports cars per se, but like kind of hot sedans or whatever, and you know, instantly just started tearing them apart. I typically more for worse than for better. This is 16-year-olds cutting mufflers off cars and thinking it sounds really cool, and eventually, well, I want to put a muffler back on it, so there's this thing called welding. So let's glue some metal and put some mufflers back on, so I stopped getting pulled over by police. And so, and so, you know, there was a couple of false steps in there where I agreed to help people with no plan of how to actually build an exhaust for them at 16. And this is mostly just cutting off the exhaust, giving up, and then having their parents go take their car to a muffler shop and finishing the job.
Oh, no.
But, I was really lucky because I was one of literally the last year in my high school that had, an auto shop class. And I never really had a desire to be a mechanic per se, but I just loved the mechanical aspect of cars. And so we actually had an engine rebuilding class, which was pretty cool to just let kids kind of run wild and, literally rebuild an old, carbureted V8 from the ground up. And so I took that class as much as I could. I think I took it twice. And so that's when you're starting to really understand mechanical systems. And there's even a little bit of maybe fabrication in there, just really basic stuff. Some welding, some MIG welding.
Tolerancing too for pistons and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You adjusting the rings and stuff like that. Really understanding, getting my first hint of what precision is, because there's like the pulleys on the outside that really, they're pretty sloppy components. But yeah, when you get into the pistons and the timing gears and stuff like that, it's another level, and cleanliness and whatnot. And, this people are probably going to laugh, but, my first really introduction to lathes was also in high school, but it was, a vertical lathe, and most people would consider it a pottery wheel. And so I was really into ceramics, and I love that too. I love working with my hands, and, clay is a really challenging medium to work with where, you're trying to make something very concentric, and it's, a weak material, but you're actually engineering in your head in real time as you try to take this lump into something that's, thin and big and impressive. And so, that's how I really got into lathes, I would say, the first point. Moving on, I grew up and, I was not really good, never good at school. I think a lot of us in the machinist world are more hands-on learners and aren't that good at, just taking stuff, memorizing it and regurgitating it for a test. And that's something I'm just terrible at. I have a really hard time remembering important things, but I could probably list off, all the cars that my friends drove in high school. So, it's more of a visual mind. And I had actually I grew up in Corrales, Oregon, and I'd gone into OSU and took one semester of kind of an intro to mechanical engineering and hated it. It was more, I think, a circumstance of me not really just fitting into that type of environment well. It's nothing really against the program, but it just wasn't a good fit. And so kind of put school on the back burner, was taking classes at community college and just started working. So I worked in a number of odd jobs, but the ones that are relevant were a company that did construction materials testing. So we're doing, scientific methods, testing concrete, testing rock, testing everything. But, it's a scientific environment. And I realized I really liked the rigorous, requirements of testing and getting data. And that was really interesting to me. And there was a mechanical aspect to it as well. From there, kind of moved on to paints and coatings R&D, which was actually coming up with new things. And that was the first time where it was true R&D, where we're making up something that no one's ever done. We're going to test it. And then we had to build test apparatus to test fireproof paint. And so we're, shooting flames at different various coatings. And, there's a mechanical aspect to setting up these tests, but also a chemistry aspect, which I thought was really interesting too.
How cool.
So within this, my car love maybe kind of, I would say, maybe climaxed or peaked. And again, I really disappointed my parents when they'd given me a really nice car, far nicer car than someone should have when they're 20. And I sold it because I wanted the money to build the car I wanted.
Oh,
And so this took me down the road, really getting into cars. And so I had my heart set at the time the WRX was out. It was new. Turbos are cool. All wheel drive's cool. Oregon, so there's dirt roads and, lots of wet places to get in trouble. And so I couldn't afford a WRX. They were new cars at the time. And so I basically built one. And so I bought a 1995 Subaru Impreza two-door coupe, and it was a cheap car, but it was red. It's cool. And, had this all budgeted out before I'd even made a single purchase. And I knew I could get the motor and drivetrain I needed in this cheap car. And so I found a Japanese, a JDM motor, so an STI motor, and put that in and got in way over my head in terms of wiring. These motors just go in like Legos, and the mechanical aspect's pretty easy, but the wiring aspect, I had done maybe car stereo wiring before this, but this was like, I'm trying to save money. So I'm buying damaged engine wiring harnesses, combining the wiring harnesses,
oh, gee.
and then, y- you know, reading Japanese diagrams and trying to make sense of this. And this project probably took me a year, but it actually worked. And I still have that card today.
No way. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's my good friend Elliot in Portland's been storing it for the better part of a decade, but it's still, it still runs and it's still a fast car. And I think it dynoed at 285 wheel horsepower. And it's 2,600 pounds, and it's a fast car. Is for a kid who was just slapping stuff together. Learn. I learned project management. I learned wiring, but then there was quite a bit of fabrication. So at this point, I'd purchased a flux core MIG welder, and I'd kind of maybe slightly improved my skills from high school at this point, and I could successfully make a exhaust system without giving up and having to go to a muffler shop to be finished.
Right.
So really got into welding, and welding's kind of one of those things that when you're welding stuff together, you need metal and you need to cut metal. And, this is where I really started to actually not quite think about machining, but it was just on the cusp of, it's fabrication. My father was a woodworker, and so pretty comfortable with hand tools and shop type stuff. But, metal was so cool because I could make a mistake, unlike wood. I could build it back up, sand it and paint it, and no one would see my mistake. And, in wood, you have grain and you have all these annoying things to deal with that metal you just don't have. It's just strong and more forgiving in some ways. So that's
Definitely.
when I
Yeah.
really realized metal was my path and not so much wood or other things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really cool. WRXs and STIs are a lot of fun. I had a friend in high school that had one, and they were probably more car than anybody at that age needs. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. They're fun. They're fun to break. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, they are pretty much like Legos. Subaru really designs them just to be able to hot swap basically anything into any one of the cars.
Yeah, it's crazy how modular they were. I think I just put a little notch in the subframe and I could put a turbo motor in. And then it was, okay, well, now we got to figure out wiring and the bulk of the project, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, it's
So
crazy.
the car thing actually kind of continued, I guess. And I got into amateur endurance racing. So that was like, people think of 24 Hour of Lemons. That's, that's not a league I actually ever did. But back then we were doing Chump Car. And now more recently we do Lucky Dog racing. And I just can't speak highly enough about Lucky Dog. It is such a cool series for people to get track time. You never get good at racing. High performance track days, it's just like taking a taste. When you're actually out on a track for 2 hours continuously and you've gone lap after lap after lap, not only is it extremely physical on your body, people think of, they think of racers as NASCAR, these kind of like fat white dudes that, aren't necessarily athletes, but honestly, they probably are. And then you look at F1, those are spelt people who are a machine themselves,
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think Lewis Hamilton is quoted saying like he loses 6 or 8 pounds every race just due to like sweat and exertion. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
Like I don't know many other sports that can say that, let alone like what people would consider physical sports.
Right, right. And we've all taken a 2 hour long drive, and it's you kind of zone out, you listen to podcast or whatever. When you're racing, that's 2 hours of I am focused right here. I'm not thinking about what's for dinner tonight. And it's hard. Your mind does trail off. But
Oh yeah. Well,
it's
not to mention, what, 4, 5, 6G corners every other second, like 200 miles an hour. Like it's insane.
our cars don't go 200 miles per hour.
Well, yeah,
But yeah, yeah,
I know
yeah,
what you're talking
yeah.
about, though. I
Those
used to work at
terrifying.
a track, and
Okay.
so I got some free track time, and like I ride motorcycles, and
Right.
you go out on the track for 30, 45 minutes, and you come back and you're sweating and just exhausted, and you're like, all right, I need a 15-minute break, and then I'll get back out there.
Right. And honestly, same time here, I was doing quite a bit of autocross, and autocross was basically because I had this Subaru that I wanted to use. And, I've actually really never gotten too many tickets, and I actually do try to be safe, but this gave us a safe environment to, flog the car and have fun, and really loved autocross. But the track days were where you get to learn to drive, because autocrossing, if you're not familiar, it's basically just like a big parking lot with some cones. And, they try to keep the cost as low as possible. So you typically volunteer half your time picking up cones, and then the other half the time you're racing. But, you might in one day get 5 minutes of cumulative race time. So, there's not a lot of room for improving yourself. You can maybe test out your car, but endurance racing is where I really started to get to be a better driver. But I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here. We had to build the car. So, that was a lot of fabrication. Now we're building a car from the ground up, including welding our own roll cage. And we got some help from some really interesting people that had tube benders and stuff. There was this old guy, Pat Thomas, in Eugene, Oregon, where I was living at the time, who had worked with Mickey Thompson. He had helped him build Baja cars, and he had old like Formula cars on the wall. I mean, it was just like a museum. And I don't really know where this guy's at now, but he blew my mind. He had a Mitsubishi Eclipse that he had basically put over an NRHA drag chassis. And so he's like, yeah, it'll get groceries, but it'll do eights. I'm like, 8 second in the quarter mile? Like you can't take that on the street. Like that's insane. And he showed me his headlight. He was trying to make it as light as possible. He showed me his headlight that he had made completely out of sheet metal. And he said, I have 40 hours in this sheet metal headlight. And it was amazing. And it was origami and beautiful and, weighed nothing. But it really opened my eyes to being like, wow, this kind of like gremlin in a shop here is making some amazing things with some pretty rudimentary tools. He taught me how to, stop being a wuss when you weld and just turn up the heat and go quick. So it was really good to actually get some not formal training, but some expert advice. So I guess my story is kind of like going in many directions here at once, but the theme is cars and fabrication and, building things from the ground up. And then along with racing, you break a lot of stuff, including I actually did crash the car at Portland International Raceway. We had to actually completely start the car over. And that process means you take the old car, you cut the roof off, you pull the roll cage out, take a new car, put the roll cage back in and weld the roof back on the new car. And so we got to be pretty good at it, doing it multiple times.
Oh no.
So let's move up here a little bit in timeline. So I was living in Eugene, Oregon. I had a great job working at the paints and coating company. I actually owned a home. Because I didn't go to college, I had no debt other than my cars. I was actually living pretty frugal, and I was able to afford a really basic house when I was 25 years old. I lived there for 3 years and had what I would maybe call a quarter life crisis. Things were like too stable. I was like, is this the rest of my life? Is this, this is like way too solved for someone who's, 28 or 27. And, yeah, got a kind of wild hair and, rented out my house and moved to Panama. So
No way.
yeah, it was a big left turn. So I actually lived off the grid with indigenous people in the mountains of, Panama. And I did that for about 10 months. And that was an experience I'll never forget. It's just a really different way of living when you don't have electricity, you don't really have reliable water, and you just have your community. And these people don't have TVs; they just walk around and talk to each other at night, and it was an amazing experience. But that eventually, when you're in your late 20s and you don't really have a retirement set up and you don't really have a clear career path, eventually you have to say, okay, I gotta make sure I can retire someday.
Where did that all come from? Like, why Panama?
That's a
Like,
fair question.
I don't want to like
No,
track
yeah,
too much, but
no,
that's
yeah, I know. It's not
so
super shinny
left field.
religious, but this is a long story, but this does lead into where I ended up today, why I thought it was relevant. And so basically, there's something called woofing, where you agree to go work on a farm for room and board and food. And so I had a different girlfriend at the time, and she thought this was a good idea, and I was like, you know what, this is the last chance to do something crazy. Let's just do it. And so, kind of on a whim, yeah, moved to Panama and went to this place for 2 weeks. And basically this hostel had tricked us into going there. We got there. He said, well, I had a bad season and, there's no farm yet. We're like, well, what do you mean? We came here to work on the farm. He's like, well, you guys are going to start it. Okay.
Oh,
I said, okay, well, where's the well? Well, we don't have a well yet. We'll have a well, in 6 months. And it's like, dude, you tricked us into coming here and there's no farm. And so we scrambled and actually found a different organization that was really, really great. And they had this house up in the mountains where we could help people with, smokeless cook stoves, water catchment projects. And then I laugh saying this, trying to help them diversify agriculture. So they had basically been living off kind of government subsistence and had lost their seed heritage. And so they had kind of really had this very basic diet. We were trying to help them expand that. And basically my time in Panama taught me it's extremely hard to help people. You can often do more harm than good. I hope I didn't do any harm. I certainly myself benefited just by learning more about the world, but learning to help people is really hard. So, ended up in Panama. It's a great experience. Would do it again if I had the chance, but basically it was time to come back. And I didn't have a job and I didn't necessarily need to go anywhere specific. I definitely wanted to stay on the West Coast, but I started considering living anywhere between LA and Seattle. And so I cast a really broad net and, I knew I loved R&D. I knew I wanted to work with my hands. And so there's this place in Berkeley, California called the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And they had some job postings and I really didn't know what a mechanical engineering technician was, but I liked the ring of it. And this was a level 1 job. You're basically sweeping the floor. it was maybe more than I had made in Oregon, but I also knew that it was an extremely expensive place to live. And so I think they kind of pinged me back after I sent in my resume, and I just started hounding them, saying, I want this job. They're like, well, we see that you live in Oregon, and I was like, that's true, but I'm actually in the process of moving to Berkeley, California, which is totally not true. And I said, I'm actually going to be there next week, and if I could come in, that'd be great. Also not true. They said, yeah, okay, if you're going to be in town, then we'll set up an interview. And so I drove down the day before,
Oh my
did
god.
the interview. This fellow who seemed to know a lot about machining and really had no idea who he was. And Mr. Lipton, I just started searching on the internet, like, who is this guy? And I found his email address, and then I was hounding Tom Lipton directly, saying, like, I really appreciate this. This is great. Let me in. It's basically begging. Long story short, they hired 4 people in this process. I don't know how many they interviewed. I think quite a few. They hired 4 people, and 3 of them were hired through internal references. And I was the only one that was a wild card. We're like, we don't know what this guy's deal is, but he's
Wow.
annoyingly desperate to get in here. So let's give him a try. It's going to be sweeping the floors for us. And so, yeah, showed up to work. And this is 2013. This is 10 years ago when I moved here. Tom Lipton was my boss. And so I think that right there is going to kind of just set off some of your listeners. Like, I'm spoiled. I don't deserve this. Who gets an opportunity to not only learn from Tom Lipton, but to be paid while doing it? Um, you know,
No,
that's
that's
so,
that's pretty amazing. And I mean, to jump into that straight from, 0 power to high tech, like, that's a pretty amazing story arc right there.
I think it just goes to show, like, you got to strike when the iron's hot. You get your foot in the door. You can't give up if you see those opportunities. And I think that theme comes back up a couple times in the story. But Tom and I got along pretty well. He's a machinist, and he's weird like all of us are. And yeah, let me take a little side story. I can't stand Tom's videos online. They're great. I understand why people like them, but he had tailored the way he would train me because he knew how I received information, which is kind of like semi ADD. Like, he knew that he had about 30 seconds to explain something before I would start trailing off. So he would joke as it, I'm going to give you the funnel and I'm going to load you up till you start choking, and then you go work. And so he would just give me these really concise directions, really good, and then cut me loose. And then he would just say things so fast. I'd be like, yeah, okay, let's do this. And I watch his videos. I'm like, oh my God, these are so slow paced. Why? Like, I had to watch this on 2X because
Right.
that's
You're
how
like,
he
this is
knows.
not the Tom I know.
Yeah, exactly. And so, no, I actually kind of come full circle. And now, I kind of miss him in some ways. And so I do watch his videos now. But at the time, I was like, oh man, I'll just go ask him this question. Why would I watch this video? So he was really great. And he knew I was really motivated to build my career. And I was like, don't waste my time with the brackets with 2 holes. I want the things that no one else wants to do. I want to learn as fast as possible. I'm going to fill that scrap bin, and I'm going to get this part. And so, this is where I learned the term slow is pro, slow is pro. So, like, he's like, you're really good and you're really fast, but you are scrapping a lot of parts. And so, low down, plan it out. And at this point, I was thinking mostly just running the Bridgeport and a couple manual mills, and really slowed down and started to kind of focus on precision, getting it right on the first try, or maybe not the first try, but at least getting in the ballpark. And so this satellite shop, way back in the day, Saunders actually toured it, but there's Fidel VMC 4020, and that was my first intro to CNC machining. We had this thing to sit near idle, and I was like, hey, let me go. Let's do it. Like, I'm getting a good feel from the manual machining. I want to go to the next level. And I think I button pushed 1 or 2 jobs that he had already set up. But basically, I was actually hired at the Lawrence Berkeley lab to work on their superconducting magnet program. And so we were building these, crazy big magnets, just amazing physics that would blow your mind. And this Fidel had an AB head. And so after doing a couple successful parts, I was tasked with making these mandrels that are about 40 inches long, roughly, I don't know, 10 inches in diameter, and had kind of, if you think of a slinky twisted on its side with kind of these ellipses that would go around.
I think I've seen those on
Yeah.
Tom's Instagram, maybe, or
Yeah.
somebody. I know like you were talking about.
Yeah. So I machined the first ones there that the lab did. And all the bad things in machining. One, learning 4th axis when you barely have a grasp on 3-axis machining. Slotting, which is, all machinists' worst situation. And these were at the time 2 millimeters wide and 10 millimeters deep. So it's a reasonably deep slot. And,
Yeah.
this is,
5XD slot is not fun, period.
yeah, this is where I became really good friends with Harvey Tool. You know, they kind of saved me, and, we could get just the perfect tool. And many people have refined this process after me and just have done much better. But I was really held back by the CAM software we were using at the time. I don't like talking bad about anyone or any software or anything, but we were using one CNC and it was just not up to speed with other things. And this is also 10 years ago. Things have changed. This is before Fusion, at least as far as I know. It could do fourth axis stuff, but it would take days of tricking it into doing these fourth axis moves, and then also require manually editing G code, which is really cumbersome. But also, I learned to read G code, and I'm no expert. I'm not like a program on the fly on the machine type of guy, but I can at least read it and understand it. And mistakes were made, but yeah, basically that was my intro into CNC machining.
Oh boy. Talk about right into the fire kind of project.
Yeah. And so this Fidal was pretty old. I think it was maybe from the 90s, if I remember correctly. So now it was living life at its max RPM, which if I remember correctly was I think 12,000 or 14,000 RPM. And it would just sit there. One of these mandrels would take 2 weeks. And, this is a lab job. So I was only working 8 hours a day, part-time job, as we like to call it. The spindle died. The spindle was not up for the task of, being as old as it was and just living life at that art, despite warming it up and doing all the good things I could do to it. And so, well, learned how to replace a spindle. And so, not only did we get to do that, but we got a effective spindle. So we actually did that twice. And
Oh
so,
no.
yeah, it's a real bummer, but, got to work with some really interesting people. One who comes to mind is Tack, and, just a really, really, really skilled technician is just like the best experience you can ever get. We would joke about his deck. His desk looks like, literally like a dump. I mean, it's just like this guy's worked there for like 160 years and has never cleaned his desk. The lab is such an interesting place. It is so cool. It's got this international vibe, but it also has this, there's a lot of old people who just won't retire because they love it. These people could go home and collect a pension and essentially make as much money as they're making, but they love the work. And that
Wow.
was so cool to me. Just be like, you guys love your job. You maybe are unwilling to clean your desk or come in on time, but you're really good at it. And they're going to like, you're the person, you're the man, you're the woman to fix, this beam line or whatever it is you're working on. Really, really learn how to just take your time and assemble really complex things. And, what's a micrometer? What's a nanometer? These are all things, we learn in these instances. So, I was really trying to advance my career there as fast as possible. Cause to be honest, the pay was really low for how expensive it was here. I was living in an apartment that was sold and they raised my rent 70%. And,
Wow.
yeah, it was just like gouging. And it's obviously I moved out of that apartment, but the writing was on the wall. Like I'm literally going to have to move if I don't figure out a way to make more money here. And so I was trying to train up as much as I could. And at this point at the lab, I was helping them with their magnet testing. And so the way you test these superconducting magnets is you cool them down to near absolute zero, about 4 Kelvin. And so in Fahrenheit, that's like, I think minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just kind of incomprehensibly cold.
Yeah.
And so you use liquid helium, which is incredibly expensive liquid. And you'd cool these magnets down and manage this system that would kind of try to regenerate the helium. But everything was really old, and it was a complex process that was fascinating. And my skills were really building up, but the compensation of the lab is just structured such that it's kind of like, whoever's been there the longest gets the raises. And that just killed me to see, older people who weren't really trying moving up. And I was just kind of stuck in this technician level 1 role that I had signed up for, you know, but my skills had increased. And at that point, I realized I kind of had to start looking for other opportunities. Tom had introduced me to this really odd fellow at this point named Jeff Tiedekin. And so, or Yeti Man is maybe,
Yep.
and so we hit it off, and he at the time was kind of hanging out in Carl Bass's shop and in Berkeley, and we had this dream to go to Bonneville together. I had gotten a free motorcycle that was abandoned at an apartment. It was 2006 GSXR 600, which is a great bike to get for free. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's a sports bike. What do you ride, by the way?
I had BMW S1000.
Okay, that's yeah, big boy bike. Okay, but
Yeah,
um,
I started on like I think it was carbureted a Honda F2 600cc bike, but yeah, I've owned a handful of them over the
okay,
years.
sports bikes though.
Yeah, yeah, all
Yeah.
sports, and I had a couple supermotos and some dirt bikes too.
Okay. Okay. So at this point, I was about 30 years old, and I had decided to start riding motorcycles. I had done a ton of auto racing, and I always kind of thought, motorcycles seem crazy. And when I was 30, I was like, I think I'm mature enough to do this. And so I got kind of a crummy bike and got into riding. But yeah, came across this Gixxer
I mean,
that
for free, like you can't beat that.
totally, and it wasn't even stolen, so that was great. Any rate, Jeff and I never made it to Bonneville. Basically, we were just working and just life got in the way, and we were still buddies. But I was hitting him up saying, "Hey, like, where are some jobs in the area? Like, I want to start doing stuff off hours or move jobs completely." And he said, "Well, my partner Crystal works at Makani, and they're always hiring." And I was like, "Dude, Makani's a Google project. That sounds amazing." He's like, "Well, it's a startup, so it could end any day. They're going to bring you on as a contractor. There's downsides too." And I went for it. Interviewed. It was much better pay, but it was not a secure job. And so at Makani, I can say was the funnest job I've ever had. It was in Alameda, which is an island just off of Oakland, and it was at an old naval base. And so literally we would be in the control tower on, Friday evenings partying, looking over the entire bay. And,
Oh, how cool!
yeah, we've got, breakfasts and lunches, catered, and any tool you want, you can just, order it up. And, just some of the funnest people I've ever worked with. But we also executed in the time I was there. Oh gosh, what year is this? This is around 2015. We did the first flight of the M600, which is just like, I maybe made a couple small parts on it, but was one of the most rewarding things to see ever is this energy kite. If you're not familiar with Makani, it's, they're these, think of it like the F1 car of wind turbines, pre-preg carbon fiber, 8 rotors, EV-tall. Essentially, the purpose of it is to mimic the tip of a turbine blade. So instead of having a whole classic wind turbine, you just have that tip where most of the actual energy is generated. And so the theory is that you could have a lot less construction materials, get higher up into stronger winds. And while you do have to use some energy to get up there and land, you could tap into this really strong wind. Really cool idea. Ended up being basically far too complex. But that said, we did it. We flew crosswind. One of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Meanwhile, I'm also getting to learn new CNC machines at Makani, and that was super valuable. So that was my intro to Haas. They had a Haas VF2. I'm a little bit older, but learned my first. This is the older controller, but still, it was like coming from a Fidel, hopping in the Haas was like, oh my gosh, this thing's intuitive. It has a probe. It has a tool touch off. This is easy. Most of my mistakes
Future.
on the Fidel were because, you would have a tool setter. You'd be setting up maybe, whatever, 10 tools. You write down those numbers and then you manually enter them into the control and you double check them all. And still, you do it 100 times, you're going to miss a number in there. And you hope it's the way where it's not cutting and not burying
Right.
itself.
Yeah, you hope the tool's short, not long.
That's a 50% chance. So you do it enough times, you have some surprises. And so going to the Haas controller, I was like, oh my God, anyone can machine using this thing. This is so easy. There are things I did like about the Fidel, like when you're jogging, you can switch axes with a knob instead of on the Haas, it's a button. And the muscle memory of doing a knob is so you don't need to look at a knob. You can just feel the tactic feedback and you can switch between axes and keep looking at your part that you're
Yep.
jogging around. Whereas in the Haas, I had to to this day, I have to look at the controller and hit X, look at the controller, hit Y.
Yeah. My
And that-
MPG on the Brothers, it's a knob and it's so nice. Yeah, like you said, I'll have my head in the machine indicating something, and it's like, all right, now I need Y, now I need Z. Yeah,
yeah, it sounds kind of petty and trivial, but these little things do make a difference and do speed up your work. So they also had a huge DMS 5-axis router. If I remember correctly, the work envelope was 8 by 12. And so this is the
geez.
machine you walk into.
yeah.
And the controller on that machine was like worse than the Fidel. It was so complicated. And I've obviously changed CAM software at this point. No, I don't know what happened to One CNC. I've never heard of anyone else ever using it. But at Makani, they were using NX. And NX is a very powerful program, but oh my gosh, like for being self-taught, they just kind of threw me in there and I was learning in the evenings on my own time. It is very not intuitive.
Yeah, I've heard the learning curve is incredibly steep on NX.
But it also had some really powerful tool paths. I think they call it cavity milling. And it was like, wow, this is like, I can just click a button and this part's roughed out. Whereas, previously the softwares I had used didn't do that. Crystal, who was there, was using Fusion. And so that was kind of my first intro to Fusion. And I'm still not a Fusion user to this day, but I was kind of like, wow, this is interesting software, knowing the price point it's coming in at, and you can do some pretty decent modeling and do your CAM. And, that's really impressive to me. I want to talk to you more about Fusion later, but Makani was great. I was only there for just a little over a year. I was a contractor, so I wasn't actually a Google employee. And Google treated contractors like subhumans. Like, we're going to a holiday party, but contractors can't come. But the Makani team was such good people. They'd be like, "We don't agree with that. We're Makani, funded by Google, which, you know, however you want to call it. We have our culture." And so, we had a number of, they call them TVCs, temporary vendor contractors. So I was a, TVC. The Makani employees would give up their plus one to bring the TVCs to the holiday party.
Wow,
Down
how
at like,
cool.
yeah, oh, such nice people. And just some of the funnest. I mean, it was just surreal to be at these Silicon Valley holiday parties where like, it's not like ice sculptures or, it's not as extravagant as like the show Silicon Valley maybe would put it out to be, but it is pretty impressive
Yeah, I'm
coming from
sure.
the lab where, the lab didn't even give us coffee. And,
Oh,
now we're, going to these catered events, but all good things come to an end. And, it's just not really being an employee was hard to stay there. And, you know, the technology honestly just seemed to be too complicated. I forget which one of the Google CEOs said this, Sergey, maybe Larry, I don't know. But he said, do you guys know how much maintenance I have to have on my helicopter that's on my boat versus my helicopter that's on land? And at this time, we were pursuing more buoy based turbines, so they're in seawater. And so just to hear the CEO say, the salt water is so much worse for my helicopter here than it is my helicopter over there. I'm just like, these you guys are, like you're talking in a context I barely understand.
yeah,
I understand salt
but
water, but I don't
but his
understand
base
owning a
point, yeah,
helicopter.
right. His base point, though, yeah, I mean, salt water is incredibly corrosive, like, and yet in wind and all of that, like, when things say that they are non-corrosive, very often they don't mean in seawater. They're like, yeah, we can stand up to like normal stuff, but not seawater.
Right, exactly. So the team moved on and executed flawlessly and did fly autonomously, in I think Norway or somewhere in Europe. And it's super impressive team. I think eventually just the, you know, people counting the numbers said, this isn't penciling out. And unfortunately that project came to an end. But at that point I'd moved on. And so there was a self-driving truck company called Otto, and they had tried to recruit me. I had a couple friends that worked there. I knew of it. And they said, "Hey, we're looking for a machinist." And, this machinist role ideally would transition into a shop manager. And that sounded really appealing to me, kind of coming in at a startup that was pretty well funded. At this point, it was pretty clear that they were going to be funded by Uber. You know, take it or leave it. Uber's a big company with, kind of a troubling past at the time. But, I'd be working at this auto company doing self-driving trucks. And that sounded cool to me. So jumped ship from Makani, moved on to Auto in San Francisco. And I'll come back to what machines they had. But shortly after I joined, the truck program shut down and morphed into supporting other teams in the Uber environment. We had actually,
Jeez.
yeah, so let me back up. We were in downtown San Francisco in a building that was falling apart. And so, yeah, it was literally an old parking garage, and it probably could have supported a machine shop, but they were driving big rigs in and out of it and had completely destroyed the floor.
Oh,
And so you'd be machining something and a truck would pull in, and the tolerances on the machine you could literally see on the part when the truck drove in.
oh, I'm sure.
And
Yeah.
there was a machinist before me that was really having trouble and was having a hard time figuring out what was going on. And they had brought tech out, and they put an indicator on the spindle and brought it down to the table, and the technician jumped. And you could see that indicator just like almost maxed out in both directions. Like, this floor is literally a trampoline.
Oh
And
no.
so you're never going to hold any tolerances. in this building. Well, this she, they really cut some corners in this building. They basically did things that were not up to code, and they were pulling power from other places. They were running diesel generators in the basement at times to support machines.
Yikes.
I saw a picture of one of the control panels during a rainstorm with a water creek coming out of the fuse panel. This building was so derelict, you couldn't imagine all the problems we had here.
Ooh.
So basically, an employee who was upset pointed out to the city what was going on there. The city inspectors came in and like, full stop. This building is going to crumble with you guys in it. You guys got to move. And so I was told I had to pack up a shop the day of. At this point, I was the head machinist, not necessarily managing people, but I was the lead machinist. And they said, pack the shop up. We're moving next week. And that's not how machine shops move. People talk about moving their home. And I have no sympathy for them. Moving your household stuff is nothing compared to moving a machine shop. You know what I mean? Just the
Oh
sheer
yeah.
weight of
Yeah,
steel.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't pack it up in cardboard boxes and move it.
No, if you're lucky, you're using pallets and semi trucks. That's how moving a machine shop goes. So we had to move to a temporary location in South San Francisco into like a steel warehouse, back on generators, 3-phase generators, running a couple Haas CNC machines and water jet. And this was a temporary thing. They built out this final facility called Pier 70. I moved the shop again. This time was planned. And this was going to be our home forever. And so I'd moved in the course of, I think, 2 years, maybe a year and a half. I had moved the shop 2 times. And, the only thing worse than moving a machine shop is doing it more than once. And, I said, I'm never moving the shop for you guys ever again. This is just ridiculous. I know no one planned for this, but this is just terrible. And this is when the job became amazing. The facility was great. At this point, I'd become, an official manager. I had a team of 3 people. And at this point, the truck program had closed down, but I was supporting LiDAR development and the jump bikes, which are the shared e-bikes, Uber Elevate, which was doing some kind of like, flying taxi stuff. I'm forgetting of an odd team, but, basic facility stuff. So this job was so cool because my boss lived in Pittsburgh and we would have a Zoom meeting maybe once a week and say, well, what are you working on? And, I tell him what I'm doing. He's like, great, keep doing what you're doing. No one's complaining. And so I had
That's awesome.
I had a super long leash and, we really kicked ass. We were doing some pretty complex machining for these LiDARs, building a LiDAR from the ground up and, working with multiple different teams. And, sometimes the teams would kind of bicker over who got priority, but, overall, it was such a cool place to work with such smart people and build, these really complex lasers that are, bouncing precision lasers and then catching them and, doing all sorts of cool things with point clouds and whatnot.
That's amazing. That
Yeah,
sounds like really fulfilling.
it was. Yeah. And, paid well. It was a cool location. It was definitely the best job I will probably ever have. It was just a little too good to be true. And that's the thing about, I took the jump to move to California because I knew there's opportunity, but it's also, this isn't like working for the local municipality that you have a pension and job security and, you're going to work there the rest of your life. We're always like, we don't know when this ride's going to stop, but we love it while it's going. And COVID came and, I don't really know why COVID affected their business model. I mean, obviously Uber got just destroyed at the beginning of COVID and they basically just had to start just axing programs. And so, this is kind of what leads into the next step is, I got laid off and, my whole team got laid off and my whole division got shut down. And in the same conversation of being fired or laid off, whatever you want to call it, they said, we don't know what to do with this shop. We have this shop here that we don't really even know what a shop is other than it's really big and in the way. And, well, they didn't say this, but I knew this. They're paying so much in rent that the shop is actually just a liability and needs to be gone because they're paying more in rent each month than the shop's worth, which is crazy. These are huge, expensive buildings. And so, I said, well, okay, I don't really know what you're saying, but I will help you guys button these machines up. I'll stay on, as long as you want me to help you sort this out. And they kept coming at me saying, you should put in an offer. You should just buy these. And then you could keep supporting the few remaining teams that stay on. And so, we went back and forth a bunch of times and walked away from each other the whole time. I'm still just packing up the shop, getting it ready to move when I said I would never move the shop ever again. We came to an agreement and I bought the shop. So, that's how Valence Precision came to be. And this is, about 2.5 years ago.
Awesome. Well, so let's get into what machinery you do have.
Yeah. So this is basically a turnkey shop. Most of these machines I didn't actually choose. So, they're maybe not what I would buy today, but this is what we got. So we have UMC 700 5-axis mill and then a VF3 SS. We have a Haas lathe ST20 SSY with, some radial and axial live tooling. We also have an Axiom water jet and a Amada press brake. So we can, file up stuff pretty quick along with, basic welding capabilities. Okamoto grinder. And then, the really cool stuff is, the optics lathe. So we were supporting the LiDAR team. And I think this answers some of the questions we got. This was set up for building optics. And
Yeah,
so
yeah. So let's get into that. Both Silas Garage and Adam Lee Machine Tech were asking about the Prezi Tech. How did you come to get it? What kind of work do you do with it? How do you find work for something like that? Like, DTLs are not really all that commonplace.
totally.
you know, all of that stuff. Let's get into why you still have a diamond turning lathe and what kind of work you do with it.
Right. Yeah. So, this, I was saving this for later on in the how am I improving? It's trying to use this lathe more is gonna be something. But, I've never advertised for Valence Precision, but we have so much work. We actually turn down quite a bit of it, which just kills me. We're actually trying to hire to increase our bandwidth. But, you know, basically through these jobs I've had at the lab and Makani and Uber, all these people who I tried my hardest to keep happy, have all moved on to other jobs, whether it be, Tesla or other, electric car companies and other LiDAR companies. So basically they all have fed work back to my shop from all these just amazing customers. And I'm so lucky and so grateful for all these people that have given me that opportunity. And so the truth is that we do very little work on the diamond turn lathe. And that is like my focus for 2023 is trying to connect with people that need this work. And the first year of the shop was literally running cable, getting the shop set up, and during that time, I actually got quite a few requests for quotes where people are like, yes, we need it. We like working with you. And at that time, the diamond lathe was the last machine to get set up. And, I just wasn't really ready at the time. So my plan was to kind of start coming back around to people and say, hey, we're ready to take on this kind of work. The lathe's amazing. It, it's just people get kind of spooked by it, but it's actually like probably simpler to run than a Haas lathe. Um, it, we end up doing a lot of just manual, code editing because you're really just taking a finishing pass on these and maybe multiple finishing passes, but, you're very rarely ever starting out with a solid blank on these types of machines. It's really just for finishing operations.
Right.
And,
So, like Adam asked, what's your favorite job you've ever run on it? So,
hey,
anything fun you can share?
yeah, I told a lot of it. The funnest one I can. And it was just for fun. We made a Fresnel lens. So if you're not familiar with that, it's kind of like little shark teeth. And we actually just made it in acrylic. And, you literally have to be careful with this thing when you take it outside. If it focuses on something, it's instant Bernie.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
My parents or my dad got us a few when we were kids, and we definitely set a few fires in our backyard.
yeah,
Big melting action figures and doing
yep,
stupid stuff like that.
yep,
For anybody who doesn't know what one of those look like, it's like a very ringed lens. If you have a VR headset, most of them are Fresnel lens based right now. I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, old TVs. If you've ever seen what's
really.
behind them, they have big giant Fresnel lenses basically in them to focus the light. They focus light to a point incredibly well, and I guess can do the reverse of that too.
Yeah, and I one way to think of it too is just think of a normal like lens with that rounded shape, and then cut it into sections and take out the gap in between. And so the lenses are really thin, and so that's one advantage is that you don't need much material to make them, and they're really compact. And so it's basically just taking the curvature of that lens, cutting it in sections, and then just shrinking it down to where there's just little sections of the lens, and the light bounces through the same way it would if it was a big curved lens.
Right. Yeah, it kinda looks like if like a you drop something in water and the ripple effect, like, that's kind of what they look like on face value.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool thing. The first time we took it outside, I just kind of like focused it on my long sleeve shirt and instantly made a hole in the shirt. I mean, it was just like the second it focused, there was just smoke and there was a hole.
So how did you design something like that and program it?
Well, so that's just, that's just the maths. So my mentor in diamond turning is Jim Merle, and he was technically an employee at Uber, but I mean, he's literally probably the best diamond turn machinist in the world. He's, when you call up, More or Pressatech and you say, "Hey, I have this crazy thing and no one will bid on it," they call up Jim Merle and they're like, this is the guy that will figure it out for you because one, he's super nice and just a pleasure to be around. But then, he's just so experienced and so meticulous and detail oriented and just thinks in a way, that they can get these, types of things done. And it was just such a great experience to be with Jim and to learn from him. So, you can program a diamond turn lathe with a number of different things. We've used everything from Mastercam, where in the tolerance, you just start adding a whole bunch of zeros. So you just get lots and lots. You can actually crank that way out there. And, when you're talking to the people who build the software, like, why would you ever do that? And we're like, well, because our machine actually will take those, you know, nanometer increments and, move this machine in such a way that we actually will take advantage of that many significant figures.
Right.
But also we use a program called Simco. Basically, you just get the curvature of the lens and put it in and into G code. It's really nothing that it's not rocket science. You're still just telling a cutting tool to move in space. It just does it with a resolution and accuracy that Haas can't offer.
Yeah, definitely. So Adam had asked also about climate control. So what kind of room do you have it in? Because I mean, I imagine that's half the battle with something like that.
Right. So there's many different levels of this, and we're definitely kind of at the bootstrap level. The room it's in is such that it's kind of we have a weird shaped building. So the shop itself is 5,000 square feet with a 3,000 square foot mezzanine. And so the previous occupants, I think, like grew pot there. So there's all these weird little rooms that have kind of like funky electrical systems. And we had to redo most of it. But the point is that this room is tucked in the back of the shop. And so there's only one exterior wall, and the exterior wall is next to another building. So none of these walls ever get sunlight on them. So the room itself is just inherently really stable. And we just have kind of like this slow swing of like summer to winter. But throughout the day, it actually really doesn't change much. And honestly, all we have in there is just a basic split system, heater and AC. So, true diamond turning, they brag about keeping it to like a tenth of a degree Fahrenheit. I think we're keeping it to like a 2-degree swing Fahrenheit. So not what we would want for like the ultra, high end of machining, but it's in the ballpark of it being pretty much good enough for what we do. If we really develop this, basically what we'll do is we'll build another enclosure around the machine itself and have another HVAC system. So, to do this right, you need about $1 million in HVAC. That's just not in the foreseeable future for us
Right.
for where we're at, unless we get more machines and this really takes off. But for what we're doing, it's adequate.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like at Uber, you guys didn't have $1 million worth of HVAC for it either, did you?
No, of course not. Yeah, and that was a problem, and it was honestly probably a worse system just because it was kind of just plumbed into this massive industrial, building AC, and it was okay. The thing about the Bay Area is that we don't really have very violent temperature swings through the year or through the day. It's
Right.
it's it's at least like the Mediterranean climate, so that is helpful for that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was useful for you guys there. So obviously, it can deal with a little bit of temperature swing and still be useful for LiDAR or something like that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
That's good. Let's see. Kyle Colon Music asked, what does it take to get super precise measurements? So what kind of QC?
Yeah. So, I was thinking about this question, and, to take super precise measurements, I think is first when you're looking at a print, it's what's important to the customer. It's not spending your time on what they don't care about and spending it on the important part to them. And hopefully that's communicated through a drawing, but sometimes it's just communicated through an email. Like, hey, I'm trying to put this bearing in this bore and I'm going to ship you one. And that's great. That normally doesn't happen. And so reading a print, figuring out what's important. From there, you decide, well, is calipers good enough? Is micrometers good enough? Do I need to find someone with a CMM to measure this? And so it also goes back to temperature. We do all of our metrology in the room with the diamond turn machine. So we keep our granite there. We keep all of our gauges there. That all those little things add up to taking accurate measurements.
Definitely, yeah. I find that working with incredibly compressed lead times on prototypes, you end up having to kind of interpret a lot of things. You're like, what does the engineer want versus what they may have said? And like sometimes, like you said, that's questioning a phone call or a Zoom meeting or something. And sometimes it's like, I can tell the design intent by everything else they've done here, and I need to make it like this, despite it not being called out on the drawing.
And sometimes it goes the other way where they dimension every single thing on the print with four significant figures. And you're like, I know that this counterboard clearance hole does not need to be, within 10 nanometers of accuracy. And, sometimes I call them and say, do you want this to be a $10 part or a $1,000 part? And they say, oh, no, 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 the $10 one. And so
Right.
normally it's just people being lazy and not making a good drawing, but it's really helpful. All the engineers out there, pay attention to your significant figures. That helps us out a lot.
Yeah, don't hit auto dimension, please.
No,
Just take a second, and if you auto dimension, make it 2 decimal places, and then specify the really tight stuff. But
exactly.
please, please, please don't do that.
Yeah. Very common. Very common.
I've definitely worked with far too many of those drawings. I think I've said the story a few times on the podcast, but at my first job, I specifically remember us working really diligently on this one bracket we've got the U of A mirror lab here. And so they make all the giant, mirrors for like all the giant telescopes in the world, basically.
Rad.
And it's based on the optics college here. So you get a lot of students straight out of college right into there. And yeah, we were working on some bracket and it had like a counterboard that was, yeah, plus or minus 3/10 or 4/10. And we're struggling with it and struggling with it. And we call him and he goes, oh, I don't care. It's a clearance fit. I'm throwing a bolt through there, dude. Just do whatever. You throw a drill in there. I don't care. I don't even care if it's a flat bottom on the counterboard. We're like, all right, buddy.
Yeah. Well, we're still charging you what we quoted it for because
Yeah, exactly. We've already spent the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh boy. Ethan asked, I feel if you ask 5 people with UMCs what they think about them, you'll get 7 different answers. Curious to hear another opinion.
Well, I don't think I'd buy one. I did buy one used as part of this lot deal, but I've been told I have one of the worst UMCs in the country. Like I said, I didn't spec this machine out, and so it's got the 8100 spindle, which
Oh no.
it's equate this to like if you had a Corvette and then you put like all season economy tires on it. It's just like it just peels out. It just doesn't want to do what it's designed to do.
Oh
And
yeah.
so that is the biggest limiting factor of that machine. It lives its life at 8100 RPM and adjusts feed appropriately. So,
Of course. Yeah,
you
I'm
know,
sure.
yeah. And so I do have like a little air powered spindle I can throw in there if I'm doing some micro drilling, and that's been pretty handy. But yeah, it's just not a precision machine. It's more for drilling a hole in the side of a part. And so, I've, I forget where you are in your purchase of machines, but I know you've said you don't want a you don't want a 5-axis until you get a CMM. And I'm like, no, that's wrong. Like you should get a 5-axis today because they're rad and you can do one and dones. You can just do that quick side up on the part. It doesn't have to be precision work if you're doing a 5-axis. So, like, yes, we all should have a CMM. That'd be great, but you don't have to wait.
Yeah, that's fair.
You
No,
could save so much time.
it's also so the reason I say that is that we need a CMM now. Like we have a manual CMM that we use a ton of, and it is no longer supported by a Hexagon. Like they basically say if the it runs its own little like computer thing that's like based on DOS cards and stuff, and like if that craps out, they just go, oh well, we can sell you a $15,000 retrofit to PC Demas, and like if you ask for anything else, they're like, oh no, that's your option. And it's like, okay, so that's kind of the weak point in our metrology setup right now. Like we use a lot. We do a lot of precision stuff that needs true positions checked. And like, yeah, you can do them with indicators and yada, yada, yada. But like when you're doing 3-axis true position, you kind of want a CMM. And
Right.
like even our manual CMM is at the limit of what I would like to be using. So it's spurred on by the fact that we definitely need one anyway. And then on top of it, it's like, well, buying a 5-axis is going to invite even more precision at even more awkward ways to check it. And it's like, well, we might as well knock this one out before we get in those really deep waters.
I hear you. And every good shop should have a CMM, but I would say don't let the CMM hold you back from making the purchase and just you can just make parts quicker. It's just all there is to it, less setups. I mean, we all like doing less setups, you know.
Oh, believe me, we want a 5-axis bad, and I have customers asking me every day,
Oh, so you
"Hey,
still
you buy
don't.
one yet? You get it done yet?" Like,
Yeah.
so
And so I'm fortunate that my buddy whose shop, so my shop's about Jeff Tiedkin, his home shop is about 5 minutes south of me, and then 5 minutes north of me is AR Machine, Austin Roche. I think a lot of the Instagram community knows that. So Austin, I met Austin before Makani, and then we worked together at Makani, and then he moved on to Auto, and then I ended up being his boss at Auto, and he was the most frugal person. He finally learned how to drive. He used to always just ride bikes everywhere, and he would stop on a road to pick up a 5-cent can. I mean, this is how frugal this guy was. But he did that so much to where he quit his good job at Uber and bought his first VF2.
yeah.
And this, it's an amazing story. I mean, he's a whole nother story, but it's been really cool to work with him. But anyway, his CMM's nearby. Another quick story about Jeff. About a year after I had moved out of Pier 70, company calls me up doing satellites and says, "Hey, we need a machinist and we want you to build a shop. And we're moving to this great facility called Pier 70 in San Francisco." I'm like, "You have to be kidding me. Like you want me to go back there?" And,
Right.
I was just in the middle of this company and I was like, it's just not the good time, but I know a guy who loves satellites and would be a perfect fit. And I think he's kind of in between, he's looking for something right now. And so I introduced him to Jeff, and Jeff's been there ever since. So
Yeah.
it's a funny community here, how, it's kind of inbred is what I call it. We all just kind of like cross paths and go back over and help each other out. And, he helped me get the job at Makani, and, I helped him get the job at where he is now. And Jeff, you owe me peanut butter cookies. That was the deal. I'm waiting on those cookies. So
Yeah, Jeff, come on.
come on.
Um, Peter Verdone asked, "What is it that you love about your business?"
Oh, well, there's days I don't love it and there's days I do. So let me back up. In my story, you probably realize I never worked at a job shop. I never had to quote anything until I had my own business. And I mean, I'm sure everyone who owns a shop says, yes, quoting is the worst part of it. I didn't even have any experience with a paywall. I was so used to just working with these brilliant engineers and wanting to just serve, they were customers, but there was no paywall. And so we would just do the best we could. We had basically unlimited budgets, and, we're going to do this the best we can. Well, now we don't have unlimited budgets. I've got to do this as economically as possible and, make what you need and charge you appropriately to where you accept the job and I don't lose money. And I can't tell you in that first year how many times I volunteered my time to give people parts. I mean, it is so frustrating when you finish a project and you're like, I think I literally lost money working a 40-hour week.
Oh, yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, I still do that very occasionally now, which is great, but, like, there are still jobs that I take on and I'm like, "Yeah, I quoted it great and I got it," and then by the time I'm done with it, I'm like, "Well, I'm never doing that job again if I can help it."
Yeah. They're gonna, if they want repeat parts, they're gonna be bummed out because it's not gonna be the same price.
Right, yeah. Yesterday's price is not today's price, let me
Yeah.
tell you
Yeah.
what.
Now I know no one else bid on this. So,
Yeah.
you miss one little undercut under something and, it just goes from there. But what I love about it, obviously it's just being able to, again, another problem is I have a really hard time getting good at any one thing because the shop's so versatile. We do fabrication, we do optics, we do, CNC lathe, we do milling. So I have a really hard time getting good at any one thing. But, when it does come together and I do get to, learn the lathe a little bit better, you know, all my CNC lathe is self-taught. And so, when you finally start making good parts and they come off consistently, that's so rewarding to teach yourself. And, obviously building on Tom and all the other people that had taught me, but, just taking it to the next level yourself and making good parts is super rewarding.
Yeah, totally. He also asked, "What's your favorite machine, operation, and material?"
Ooh, favorite machine. Again, it's just so nice to have the versatility of having all the machines. So sometimes, we'll blank out something on the water jet and then just go straight to the mill. Whereas, some people don't have the advantage of blanking out stuff on the water jet. So I don't think I like any of my machines more than the other ones. It's more or less just the combination of having the machines I have makes me just kind of feel like, I can build anything. And that's just a rad feeling right there. Operation, I love a good one and done. I mean, it's just so cool to have a little tab that you just knock off on the Scotch-Brite wheel and, talk about lowering your setup time. Single setup parts is just so rewarding once you start getting kind of comfortable with tabbing. Material, I don't know if I'm lazy, but I love Delrin. I mean, it's just like the finish looks great. I love using the Harvey single flute cutters, and one of my local customers does autonomous sailboats. And so I do a lot of, stainless and also Delrin for them. And those parts just come out so good. And even on, the UMC, which has its issues, they just are rock solid parts. Super, super cool.
Awesome. I'm guessing this next question is he's talking about himself. He says, Pete made you a nice logo for Valence. Why didn't you use it?
Well, because it was wrong. So, because people were like, most people were like, Valence, I don't understand. It's like Valence electron. And Valence actually means like a special relationship between two things. And so, I, naming a business is really hard. It's actually something that takes more time than it should, because obviously it can't be used and it has to resonate. And I really struggled with it. And to be honest, I really don't like the shop name. I wish it was just Valence, but I was already taken. So I added Precision, and it's just like every shop just throws that in there. And this whole shop deal happened so fast. It was just one of those things. I was like, check the box and move on. Find a shop, move on. Find a rigger, move on. And so it was just everything had to happen so fast that I've never really been in love with my company name. Jeff and Austin thinks it's hilarious to call it Valencia Fab, but I guess I think it's funny too. But yeah, no, Pete's awesome. He's part of the frame building community, and so he's been really helpful for that. I'm going to come back to that when we talk about what's in my browser, though.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it's funny. You do your best to come up with a name. You're like, yeah, this is clear. It's easy. And man, I still get petroleum machine. I've gotten checks written out to petroleum machining.
Oh,
And
geez.
I'm like, no, let's do that again.
Yeah.
Or like, I get Protrium. Brad and I just like make fun of all of the weird ways people have bastardized our name over the years. We had Protium machining, like our logo as our background on both of our work computers. And one day when I left early, he went in and modified it and added a second R. So it said Protrium instead of Protium, and like just waited until I noticed. Yeah, it's really, really interesting to see all the ways like you think you're like, yeah, like, yeah, it might be a little weird, but like people get this, and then nope, not at all. So yeah.
Yeah. So if I do another company, I'm just going to pick like three random letters from the alphabet that aren't used yet, and just be like, it's you know ZQ4 machining. And you can make up whatever you want, but whatever you start giving my email address is, Nick@valenceprecision.com. Okay, can you spell that? It's just like, oh, why did I pick such a long company name?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People Protium machining, there's the double M there for my email.
Oh,
And
right.
that trips people up every single time. They're like,
Right.
wait, two M's? I'm like, yep, yeah.
Yeah. Simple is good.
Yeah. His last question was, what skills or understanding do your employees need when working with you?
That's a good question. I've done well with employees and I've done bad with employees. I've even scared some off before. So I really try to be supportive, but at the same time, I do expect a lot. So, I work at kind of like a manic pace where I'm personally not happy unless I have many machines running at once and I'm on my computer doing quotes. And I don't expect my employees to do that, but sometimes they kind of get, wide eyed with the way I just am basically running around like a chicken without a head. And so basically just, what I expect of them is always be trying to learn and always trying to improve themselves because, like I said, I am hiring. And what's cool about my shop is that there's such a range in skills that can be learned. Like, I would be happy to get someone that's very skilled and I would be happy to get someone that's just starting out. My main employee, Joshua, who's just been amazing. He was my buddy's neighbor. He came in with zero machining experience and, he now, I don't even have to show up some days and he's running all the machines, push people too. So the first time he programmed a part and ran on the mill was a 5-axis part.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, and when I teach people to weld, so we're going over to the TIG welder and the first thing you weld is going to be a TIG welder and it's going to be really hard. But then when you go back to MIG welding or you go back to 3-axis machining, you're like, oh, I've already learned that. That's done, And so I do push people, but at the same time, there's an opportunity to like really grow fast. And, it's obviously, not limitless, but to think someone could come in and, run the water jet for a couple of years, but then a couple of years later could be doing ultra precision diamond turn machining. I don't think many shops can offer that. And so,
Definitely not. Yeah.
I'm hoping this podcast sparks some really intriguing people to hit me up because, you know, our bandwidth is just not where we need it to be. We're turning down far too many jobs.
Like you said, though, that it's a great position to be in. It's better that than the other way around.
Totally. I'm curious to know how busy you are because I hear from salesmen that, some shops are just idle and they're twirling the thumbs, mostly in the semiconductor space. But then, some people are busier than ever. I think there's a big effort to reshore lately. And so some of my customers who do production, which I don't do, are bringing stuff back and doing production here. And that's so cool that like people are finally realizing that, it's not always worth saving 10 cents on a part when your, your communication circle is not as good as someone in the States in the same time zone, you know, maybe worked with previously, I'm not just going to kick a part over and expect it to be right. Like we're going to work together and make sure it works for what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. Operate very similarly where we pride ourselves on our communication with our customers. Like I have no problem reaching out and being like, hey, this model looks messed. I just had one the other day. I was like, hey, this feature looks weird. Like it looks wrong. And they came back and they're like, oh yeah, it was a modeling artifact. Here's the new rev. Thank
Right.
you so much for catching that. It's like,
Right.
no problem.
Yep.
I'd much rather do that than send you stuff and have you remake it. Like you're already on a compressed timeline. The last thing you need is 2 rounds of prototyping before you even test.
Right. Right. And all the shipping in between and all that. Yep.
Yeah. So that brings me on to shop news and new things. What's going on new in your world? You said you're hiring, but anything else new, fun, exciting?
Yeah. So we actually got a quote on a machine last week and we are thinking about one, where we would fit it and if it's the right machine for us. And so I don't think this is going to make you too excited because I heard you're not a Matsura fan, but we're considering a MX 330 with PC10.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So, my I like to call my sister shops, Jeff and Austin both have Matsuras. And that was kind of my first introduction to like really seeing them and really seeing how they can work. And, it kind of goes back to the UMC. When you're trying to blend surfaces across different positions, the UMC is just not very good at it. You're going to be going to that Scotch Brite wheel and blending that in, whereas the Matsura, joke with Austin and just tell me he has the easiest life ever because he just throws metal at that machine and he gets the parts he needs and he's on easy street. And that's not true. He works so hard. But I joke all the time, like I have a hard life. I have to like, coax my machines into making the parts that are needed. And he's on easy street with the Matsura. Granted, they obviously come at a different price point. So there's some stress involved with paying off a machine like that.
Totally. But unattended running and 10 pallets, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That'd be really
So,
cool.
so future plans is, really trying to bring some, I think all of your guests say this, but, trying to bring more automation in the house. And, you know, we're also shopping for a CMM. Austin has one that we can use, but, we will need to get our own in house. And, trying to up our, diamond turn work is in the future plans. And then, you know, I've actually really been enjoying some of your podcasts. Some that stood out for me were Jay Pearson and then also Robin Renzetti, of course. What I love about Robin is that he's so frugal sometimes, using a Shars tool holder with a good insert, like that type of thing I really respect. At the same time, you look at, what Jay builds and it's like almost jewelry. I mean, it's just such beautiful fixturing. And so, honestly, after listening to both of his interviews, I just went online and bought his Rotovice and that just showed up, I think 2 weeks ago and I haven't used it yet, but I'm super excited. It is such a nice piece of machinery.
Do you have a fourth on your VF
No,
or
but
is it going on the UMC?
yeah, exactly. So just,
Okay.
yeah. So basically just to kind of do some tombstone type work on the UMC and, I got some soft jobs for it too. And, in the little comments when you buy stuff online, you can write a little note. And I said, hey, listen to your podcast, the With Intolerance podcast. I got excited about your product and I thought I'd try it. And Jay wrote me an email. It was so cool that he like said, oh, I'm happy that you got this, happy it works out, happy you're listening to the podcast. So that was super cool. Just like, I was surprised he reads those comments, I guess. I would think that would just go to some worker bee and they put the vice in a package and ship it to you. But no, he actually apparently he reads those. So that was pretty cool.
That's so cool. Yeah, Jay's such a cool guy. Like his most recent time on the podcast, he reached out to me and was just like, "Hey, if you ever want me back on," and I was like, "I'd love to have you back on." I didn't reach out because I thought you were like so busy. I didn't
Yeah.
want to waste any more of your time. You've
Right.
been on 3 times now. Like
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
And so,
he's such a great guy.
that my wife has a nice new electric car, but like I daily drive a 1998 Toyota Tacoma pickup. That's the base model that has no AC or anything. So I'm actually a pretty frugal person. And, that Vice costs more than the truck did. So, like that's one end of the scale. The other end of the scale, kind of taking some of Robin's tips is like sometimes you don't need ultra nice stuff. And so what I'm excited about right now is because of the LiDAR program, I literally have a pallet of these aluminum rounds that are 10-inch diameter, 5 inches long. I've never known what to do with them. Occasionally I have a job that I can use it with, but it's kind of an odd shape, kind of big. And so what I just designed, and I'm going to start making this next week, back up a little bit here. I've had some struggles lately with my 5-axis work holding. I've broken some Raptor soft draw vices recently.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I actually really like their stuff. And, basically after you run 1,000 parts on a vice, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. You're going to make mistakes. I myself have made a lot of mistakes. You mow into a vice here and there, you got to replace it. And so I made a mistake. I bought the aluminum version of the Raptor soft jaw. Don't do that. Just because they're 2/3 the price, buy the stainless one. The other ones are toys. I broke it within the first 3 weeks.
Oh
On the
no.
first job, I ran 10 aluminum parts on it and it's cracked and broke. They were really cool. They did a warranty replacement. The warranty replacement broke on the first part. And
Oh,
so, lesson learned there. We don't use aluminum for fixturing. We all know that, steel or stainless, you got to use the tough stuff. The other thing that kind of bothered me is I have a 5th-axis self-centering vise. And, again, those jaws eventually need to be replaced. And so I bought, a replacement jaw, $150. I'm like, okay, whatever. One jaw shows up. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not even a pair for $150.
oh no.
It's not, I looked at that. Yeah, of course, you look at it again, you're like, yeah, it does not say two of them, but like, just charge me 300 and send two of them. Like, why would you want one vice jaw? What are you going to do with one jaw? I was
Yeah.
like, that is just so frustrating that it wasn't clear. And in the meantime, we're always kind of searching eBay for, I'm like, well, what, used work holding can I buy and get going here? And I see these Chinese vices. And I don't know if anyone has experience with them. If they do, please let me know. But you can get Chinese self-centering vice for $66.
Is that like Zin Dang
Yeah.
or something?
Have you used them at all?
I haven't used them. I feel like I've had a couple friends. I think Easton might have one. I think a couple friends have bought them. They said they're not terrible.
Can't be good for that price point. I just don't believe it, but I'm going to try them out. And so I've got these big rounds of aluminum. I've got a CAD model where I have 6 of them, kind of on I'll mill down this 10-inch round and put 6 of them on it and put that on the UMC and hopefully run, six first stops. And the way I have it set up is if I have 6 on there, I can get to one side and the top. And if I do, I could take off 3 of the vices and just run 3. And if I do that, I can get to 3 of the sides and the top. So I'm excited to try that out. So my point is, on one end, I'm, investing in some really nice work holding from Pearson. And at the other end, I'm trying, I think my total cost, whatever 66 times 6 is. And then I have this round lying around. And so, this is just a little bit of my time and I can do something that can make 6 parts at night. So kind
Yeah,
of,
that'd be killer if it works.
yeah. So
I
that,
definitely look forward to hearing how you like them.
yeah, I'll definitely post some pictures. Yeah.
I want to say that it's either them or another company very similar to them is what we think the Haas 0 point stuff is made by because it looks incredibly similar.
Okay.
Like if you look at the Alibaba listing
Yeah.
for the Chinese one and then the Haas one, you're like, oh yeah, like if you just lasered Haas on that one, it's probably the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm excited to try them. I'm going to come in with low expectations, but if the whole vise costs less than half of what one replaceable jaw costs on a 5-axis, I mean, it can be a semi-disposable tool at that point,
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
You could plan on cutting through it and still be money positive if you have a good part in there.
Yeah. And the steel's probably as soft as cheese anyway. So it wouldn't even ruin your end mill. So we'll see.
Oh boy. Well, that brings me to the last 2 questions I ask every guest every week. Then, what did you research this week? What's been popping up in your browser?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to Peter. I am buying some bike components because another thing that one of my passions is mountain biking. And Peter Verdone, who asked some of those questions, all your frame builders know who he is, love or hate him. He's the best engineer when it comes to bikes. He is the real deal. He's out there building many frames per year, testing them, crashing them, breaking them, getting hurt. And he answers to no one. He's not trying to sell these bikes. It's because he loves it and does it as a passion. And I really respect that. And so he's helped me with multiple designs. I built my first frame in 2017, and that was a mountain bike that, still to this day, you'd be hard pressed to get geometries like that it was so forward thinking at the time. It's a rad bike, and it really kind of rejuvenated my love for biking. And I even did my first bike race last summer at the age of 39. So we have
That's awesome.
a local park here called Joaquin Miller, and they did a enduro race. When if you're not familiar with enduro, you're not timed on the uphill, you're only timed on the downhill. And people of my stature benefit from that greatly because I'm a very slow climber. I'm a big rider, a heavy rider, and gravity helps me on the downhill side too. So this is where we ride all the time, so we know the trails well. And so me and my buddies were like, well, let's just sign up in the expert class, even though we are not experts. And I ended up getting fifth place
Oh, that's
against like
awesome.
belt pros on like, $10,000 full suspension bikes. And I'm on this hardtail, bike. And granted, I do have the trails really well memorized, but that was sweet. A lot of it is just knowing the trails, but a lot of it's the bike and just having the correct equipment. So what I'm searching this week is bike components because we are building, what the industry refers to as gravel bikes. So basically, a heavy duty road bike that can kind of go on some, you know, fire roads and stuff like that. So just getting components for that, which is always really fun. So expect to see some Instagram photos of some bike building in the shop if I ever have any spare time. This bike build has actually been in process for 2 years. I machined the dropouts like 2 years ago. We have 3D printed, metal 3D printed parts that we're welding in. So they're super advanced bikes. They're really cool stuff
Oh,
going on there.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize. I think I have boxes and boxes of projects that are midway through it or a quarter way through it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll work on it when I'm not busy. Never.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that also brings me to then my other question I ask every guest, which is what are things you're working on to be a better person, leader, employer, any or all of the above?
Yeah. So again, that's like something that's, you're never done with. I have so much to improve. One, I got to start being a good machinist. So someday it's going to happen. I hope that I can focus on diamond turning in the near future. But really what I'm focusing on right now is taking care of the employees I have. Yeah, I'm so grateful for them. And so what I've been doing this year is we now have PTO. We're slightly moving out of startup world. We're setting up a matched IRA. So, things of a big boy company where, hopefully we can attract some good talent, but also really just, you know, give as much to the employees I have as I can.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that that's, especially in the current market, something that has to be on the forefront of every business owner's mind is something like that.
You can be in startup land for a while, but eventually people want to take a day off and be paid for it. I don't know if I'll ever get to do that ever again, but my employees should at least get to. So that's what we're working towards.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the last thing you want is to invest all this time and money into training people and then lose them because you don't have the benefits that they want.
Totally.
And like you said, like PTO for sure is something that everybody wants.
Right. Right. Understandable. I know we're going on kind of long here, but I want to ask you a question. So if I remember correctly, when you had a day job, you were using HSM Works, and maybe I skipped over it, but that's what I use now.
Okay.
And I know you use Fusion, I think, in your own shop.
I
And
do.
so hopefully you haven't covered this too much, but I want you to tell me, how stupid I am for paying for SolidWorks on top of, cause I have Fusion as part of HSM Works. So I have access to it. It's just me personally, once you learn a language, you kind of want to stick with it. And, I'm pretty good SolidWorks user. So I have a hard time just sitting in Fusion and driving it, just the way you rotate a part, and I know all these things could be changed, but I just kind of wanted your thoughts on like how stupid you think I'm being staying with HSM Works, or if there's things you miss about it.
I don't know that so I think that mates are far superior or easier to use than joints large majority of the time. There's some things that joints do occasionally that I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's less button clicks than SolidWorks. But on the whole, I think mates were much better. So if you're doing a lot of assemblies, that's one big thing, in SolidWorks. I mean, Fusion just gets all the fun stuff though. Like I missed so many tool paths and so many options in HSM Works because they just kind of have stopped updating it. Like all of
Yeah.
the new module works tool paths that are just amazing so far that are coming into Fusion. Just I don't think we'll ever make it to HSM Works.
I think a big thing too is the community behind Fusion. It's the users are really engaged with helping each other. And, a couple weeks ago, I don't really do this much, but I had a programming bug in HSM and I posted on the forums, and I think one guy responded saying, yeah, I don't know how to fix that. And then never got a response. And what I was trying to do is basically do some kind of like faux knurling in the CNC lathe where, you just run like a multi-start thread and then do a left-handed one. And I could do the right-handed one, but as soon as I told it to do left-handed, it would, no matter what setting I did, it would have the feed in like 20 feet in front of the part. So there'd be this one line
Oh,
of G code with
jeez.
just like whatever it is in inches, like, 10 feet in inches. And no matter what I did, I could not get rid of that bug in there and, never got any support to fix it. So I ended up knurling it manually on our manual lathe. So, which
Yeah.
is what I didn't want to do, but that was just kind of disappointing that community isn't as vibrant as Fusion.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my notes and I totally missed a big thing. I'm sorry for going on so long
No,
here,
no,
but
go
I
for it.
actually have 2 jobs. So
Okay.
yeah,
Do tell.
so I bogged down in Valence, but we also have a robotics startup. So, that was actually one of the main reasons, me and a silent partner started Valence was to have a facility to build robots. And so I also am a co-founder of another company called DirtyRobotics. And what we're doing is small scale autonomous rovers. And so if you think about data collection in the field, if you think about being, these are things that we've all watched Star Wars. We all know rovers of the future. We all know little robots driving around are what we want. And at Dirty Robotics, what we're trying to do is get more data from fields and be in the field more often with small vehicles that don't compact soil. There's huge labor shortages in agriculture. So automating some of these tasks, whether it be weeding or data collection or even applying fertilizers, these are all things we're trying to work on. So, I'm sure you're a busy person, but having a second business is just like a little bit crazy. And then
Yeah.
on top of this, I had my first child 1 year ago. So
Oh my goodness, as
yeah,
if you needed more.
right. Yeah. So luckily I have an awesome wife and good support network. But yeah, it's been a crazy last year. It'd been crazier 2 years. So yeah,
That's cool though. Yeah,
we'll
I just
recommend
pulled
it, but
up.
exciting stuff coming.
Yeah, I just pulled up your website, and it's cool to see kind of a peek into your space as well on the homepage.
Yeah, so you can see like the weird compartments where those used to be individual rooms where, yeah, they were literally, I think, like growing pot. And, you know, my landlord kind of cleared out that front area. And when we first moved in, he offered to clear out the entire mezzanine. It was like, no, this is a really cool engineering space upstairs. So that's kind of where we do the assembly. And we also, we store motorcycles up there. We have, I think, 13 motorcycles up there right now. So
Oh my
the
god.
theory is that we would stay late, have a beer and work on motorcycles, and they're just collecting dust. It's so sad. It's really sad. We don't get to play as much as we would like to, running 2 businesses and having busy lives. So
I know the feeling. I bought a 1975 Kawasaki maybe 8 years ago, and it just sat for like 4 or 5 years, and finally I think I cleaned out the tank so it didn't smell like varnish anymore, and then sold it off to the first person who was like, "Yeah, I'll give you, a couple $100 for it."
the 4-cylinder one?
No, I think it was a twin.
Okay, twin.
Yeah, I wanna say it was like a K400 or something like that. Can't remember. I knew very little about it. I never invested any time into it because I was like, "Oh, this is a great price." I think I got it for like $100
Oh, nice.
and picked it up, and I was like, I had all these, delusions of grandeur of fixing this thing up and riding it, and then it just sat forever.
So fun fact, my main motorcycle that I drive now is, Jeff Teakin used to be a lot cooler and now he has no motorcycles. So I bought his last motorcycle, 2008 Ducati Multistrada 1100S. And
Oh,
so,
cool.
yeah, so it's like, I call it my dorky dad bike. It is such an ugly bike, but it sounds so cool. It's so comfortable. The suspension's so good. You can ride it all day. I love that bike. In fact, it's nice. I'm going to try to ride today.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it's crazy too, the story arc of the Multistrada. Like it's went from that dorky dad bike to like it's pretty cool now. Like
Yeah.
maybe that's just because I'm older too, and I'm like, oh, I could ride with those.
Well, it's super comfortable. Once you get your weight off your hands and you're like, oh, I could actually sit on this and like, when I was working in San Francisco, the only way to get there is by motorcycle. That's reasonable, and that's where I really started to ride a lot. But
Yeah, we just got lane splitting legalized here maybe 6 months ago, and of course, I sold my bike, like, within a month of it
oh, geez,
being legalized because I was like, I wasn't riding it, it was just sitting, but I definitely have, like maybe I'll get a electric bike just for a little commute or something like that because, zero bikes are starting to look a little more attractive, and I don't know. I've ridden one electric bike and was incredibly impressed by the feel you have through it, like, with no motor vibrating it.
interesting.
I mean, I could roll up to a light and almost just, like, not put my feet down. It was so
Wow,
balanced because
wow,
there's no motor. While you're riding, you feel every little pebble because there's no, engine thrum
wow.
that you feel. It was really cool, and the torque, I mean, just having instant torque, you're like, "Oh, this is" what I had always wanted to do was buy one of those Alta Motors supermotos,
Mhm.
and then, of course, Harley did the Harley thing and bought them and destroyed them, so,
Right, right.
can't do that, but I would love something like that.
So the torque's not scary. It doesn't just like instantly like lift the front. It's because I assume it's like predictable.
Well, it's predictable and with modern electronics. I mean, my BMW was the same way. I mean, it had 200 horsepower, but like with power limiting, it knows with IMUs when the front's coming up and it slightly decreases power output and just keeps that front wheel on the ground.
Awesome. Yeah, electric's the future. Like I said, my wife's now driving a Kia EV6, and I never thought we would own a Kia, let alone a pretty expensive one. That thing's so rad. It's so cool. It's so quiet. It's so fast. It's 800 volts. It charges really quick. It's the future. Yeah, electric's so rad. I'm
Yeah.
excited for
And
it.
to anybody out there who's like, Dylan, you've given up on your motorsports route. I still love engines. Like, I still want a bike that is, 200 horsepower, but like for a commuter bike or a commuter car, it's really hard to beat something with like very little maintenance and you just plug it in at the end of the night and don't have to go to a gas station and, stuff like that. It's appealing for sure. And,
Yeah,
and they're actually a lot of fun. They can be a lot of fun.
yeah, totally. People think, oh, you have range anxiety. It's like, no, it's like always charged because I just leave it on the charger. So I don't have to go to the gas station ever. It's like, it's actually one less errand to run.
Well, and I live like 10 minutes from the shop. So it's like, you know, I'm not taking this bike to Phoenix.
Right.
Like if I want something that's going to go a long way, I'll buy a, S1000 XR or a Multistrada or something like that that I can go tour on.
Mhm.
But like for little jaunts around the town, like why would I want something that is all of this extra stuff on top of what I actually need?
Right. I mean, none of us are running gas powered CNCs. I mean, we all love electric motors. You know?
That's a very good point. I like that. Well, Nick, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time, and it was really cool to get to know you a little more. I mean, like I said, I'd seen you on Instagram. Adam had talked about you a little bit, but like, man, you just had such a cool backstory. I mean, such interesting jobs that I think most of us don't realize are even out there.
Last fun fact before we go, Adam was the one who replaced me at the lab.
Oh, that's
So when I
funny.
left, Adam came on and he's like, "What is going on with your programs? What did you have to do to make these parts?" And I think at that point they kind of like tore it up. They're like, let's go to Fusion or something. So yeah, it all comes full circle.
That is crazy. Well, thank you again. Thank you to all the Patreon members, new Patreon members, Proksch Manufacturing, Nick and Friedrich. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.